like to welcome Jackie Wayman from Curtin University, who is presenting to us today on Learning Access Plans, what we are learning. We do have the expectation that we will have Merrin McCracken at some stage. Merrin's actually had computer issues and we hope to have her join us very soon. This is just a trial for AdSet to trial the use of the webinar technology, but more importantly, trial the use of the captioning pod. Just in trying to meet the accessibility needs of all people and all learners. We're working with Bradley Reporting to to provide us with the captioning pod you can see at the side here today. All right, so we might make a start. So over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Darlene. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I've just noticed Merrin's joined as a participant. But
Oh, good. So Kylie, can you move her?
Name there. So we might just want to check if she's online. But I'll make a start anyway. Yeah. Okay. All right. So yes, hi, I'm Jackie Weinman. I'm a disability advisor at Curtin, and as Darlene said, we're piloting a new way of sharing information across our sector using webinars. And we're going to share with you a presentation we've done previously. We've done it at the Pathways 11 conference and the ANZA conference last year in Wellington, New Zealand. Based on a survey we did at the end of 2012 about learning access plans. And I guess we had the idea of starting this because I sent a query to the Ofsted list about learning access plans and asking various questions about what people did and how they managed them. And Merrin contacted me and we kind of got in touch and thought it would be a great idea to do a survey. So we were both Attend members, so we did it under the banner of Attend. And we were really delighted that we had responses.
Sorry, it was
different institutions, and people shared us a lot of information with us and a lot of interest in the outcomes, and we started thinking about developing a best practice guide, but having seen the results, it was really hard to kind of make clear recommendations about what works best. So it's more like, you know, what we're doing now is sharing ideas to make use in our own practice. So today we're going to share the results of our survey and also reflect on how they resonate with our experiences at Deakin and Curtin. Deakin is where Merrin works, particularly.
And hello, Jackie. If you can hear me, I'm here now.
Hi, Merrin. Okay, would you like to take over?
Thank you for introducing.
And we welcome comments from you too. And I guess you could put your hand up if you want to ask a question or type a question. Is that right, Darlene? Hello?
Yes, people can type questions down the bottom as well. Okay. And just sorry, Merrin, just for you to know too, I don't know if you and Jackie who wants to take control of the PowerPoint, but you'll see the next button there, so you can move the underneath the PowerPoint back and forth.
And Jackie, I'm suggesting that for our respective parts, we take our own respective control, if that makes sense. Sure. And thank you to all our audience for bearing with us as we learn the new technology.
Is there anything else you want to add, Merrin? I've covered the introduction that you were going to do.
Yeah, thank you. Terrific.
Okay, so just moving on to the next PowerPoint. We had, in terms of respondents, we had mostly disability officers and advisors, 32 of them, 14 managers and 3 other people, and mostly from universities, 12 TAFEs and 4 that were universities and TAFEs, and the vast majority were using learning access plans or, you know, the equivalent in their organisation. Then we asked what they're called, and we got a real variety of responses. The most popular was Learning Access Plan, but that was only 6 out of the 32. And here are some examples of some of the other feedback we got. There were also things such as learning and assessment plans, academic integration plans, individual management plans, individual education plans. So we were hearing the same words over and over again. So I just created a Wordle that just sort of shows you which words were most commonly used, and it looks like Learning Access Plan is the most popular. So then we asked of the people, if they weren't using Learning Access Plans, why weren't they using them? And it's really hard to know what's behind some of these comments, but some of the comments we got were system problems, that different adjustments require different arrangements, so maybe it was difficult to have a one-size-fits-all plan, and it may not be in line with the philosophy of trying to embed processes into the mainstream. So we also had a comment that one organisation had stopped using the plans because they believed it, because all other students didn't use them, it didn't make sense to have one for students who had a disability. Yeah, so we got some feedback, but I guess that was only from 9 institutions who didn't use them. So we did ask what the alternative was, and again, difficult to interpret, but we got some feedback. They had a different process and they used a process for alternative arrangements, and also that reasonable adjustments are negotiated individually depending on the type of adjustment and complexity. And I must say, based on the Curtin experience, that's exactly why we moved to the access plans, because it was just way too time consuming and difficult to negotiate each adjustment individually. Which links to the next slide, which was why did they do it? Why did they implement it? Some of the feedback being everyone else was doing it, and certainly in my experience, people who studied at other institutions were coming to see us and expecting that we would provide them with a similar document. People use them to streamline and increase efficiency, to increase students' independence because they're more timely, encourage collaboration, more consistency, less need for contact with the Disability Liaison Office, and also provide education to academic staff and others. And I guess, that can depend a lot on what information you put in them and, how much you can actually include in a plan to not make it unwieldy. But Maren, from your perspective, what were the reasons you started using them at Deakin?
Yes, and look, people may remember Tony Payne, who was in the sector here in Australia for quite a while, and particularly at UTAS. The reason we did it was because Tony said so. But we also were responding to quite a lot of requests from faculties saying that they were feeling that they needed more information about students in their classes, and that it would be useful for them to have what they initially were suggesting were lists, and we felt that lists weren't appropriate, but that where there was documentation that gave information on reasonable adjustments, that was appropriate.
Okay. Are there any comments before we move on? No.
Darlene here.
Darlene,
I was
hi.
thinking. No, it was interesting that no one actually brought up legal requirements. Like I thought, for some ways, it actually gives evidence of what you're actually what the support you're actually offering. So I thought that would be a benefit for universities and TAFEs as well.
Yeah,
Knowing that you raised that as an issue, or
we didn't ask about it in our survey, did we?
Well, except that it is interesting that it wasn't a rationale, and these were open answers. So people, so what we've got here is a summary of the sort of answers that people gave. And you're right, Darlene, it is interesting that it obviously didn't come up as one of the strong answers. There, in another spot, and in fact in our next slide, we'll start to share what some of the information in Learning Access Plans was, and there were some comments about legal obligations then. And I have moved on. Yeah, thank you, Jackie. This is a very cluttered slide, and I'm very sorry to put it to you in such small print, but in particular this looked at some of the details of some of the answers to the question, what information do Learning Access Plans contain? And the first three here are in relation to disclosure, and we'll come back and talk about them in a minute. From then on, there's information about reasonable adjustments to teaching and learning. Reasonable adjustments to teaching and learning, 92% included it. We did wonder what the 8% how the 8% didn't have it. Reasonable adjustments to assessment, 97%. Disability officer contact details, 86%, reasonable adjustments to placement and work integrated learning, 78%, timeframes, referrals to other services, the legal obligations of staff, and that picks up on your comment there, Darlene. 49% made note of that in their Learning Access Plans, and others talked about inherent requirements and information, a small number there, around 22%. And we won't go into inherent requirements today, that's a whole other paper, but they were the sorts of things that, and this was a pick list that we gave them. So it left this large one at the end here of all other responses. And if we explore a little bit more about what else Learning Access Plans contained, they also contained student complaint procedures or links to them, student goals, Indigenous heritage, scholarship information, student responsibilities, and that's a really interesting one, and detail there on and sharing there on what people are putting for their student responsibilities, I think would be something to explore more. Medical emergency or emergency evacuation plans were often part of the plan, and teaching strategies for particular disabilities. When one of the things that people found most interesting about the survey, and we had lots of feedback at this section, was that people would say, oh no, we don't include that, but we will now. It was really nice to see the sorts of options that other people were including in plans.
It's Jackie here. I think it also raises an interesting point that the idea is sort of being adopted by other equity target groups, like, you know, to communicate maybe particular needs, and whether that needs to be separated from disability or whether it can all be lumped together in one plan, things like Indigenous heritage and scholarships and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack. And the other area that we'll look into a little bit more here is these first three questions here, which related to do your Learning Access Plans require disclosure or information about the student, or optional disclosure or no disclosure? And the breakdown for that was, and I know it doesn't add up to 100% because we've got a bit of duplication here, between particularly required broad category and optional further information. But 57% of respondents had optional disclosure, so where it was up to the student to make a decision about what they disclosed. 30% required some broad category disclosure, so usually those categories that are used for our reporting to the Department of Education. And 24% had no disclosure and no expectation of disclosure. Again, I think an interesting area, and I know for us, we take the optional disclosure route, and we talk it through with students and the pros and cons of what they may wish to disclose in terms of their disability and of course the impacts. Sometimes we just include the impacts, and the response from some staff was to say that, you know, impacts such as poor concentration or difficulty with memory or fatigue, they didn't feel was enough information. We had one much loved Associate Dean Teaching and Learning who's since left Deakin, who just looked at me and said, that sounds like me. It's not enough information. And others, you know, who are feeling like are confused sometimes by the mixture of information that's involved in a learning access plan, where some people will give a lot more disclosure and others not. So there's many a time when I've actually thought we might have been better to go down the absolutely no disclosure path. Jackie, what's the story for you at Curtin?
Well, we do the same thing. It's optional, and usually the students draft a sentence with our assistance that they're happy to put on the plan. But for all the reasons you've described, it's certainly got pros and cons, and some students don't want to disclose anything, where other students are quite happy to disclose. But we tend to kind of advise students to disclose only information that would be helpful for them. So for example, if they have dyslexia, that's quite helpful for lecturers to know that. But if it might be something that, you know, might create a problem, it may be better to just talk about the impact. And we also try to educate lecturers or academics that they don't really need to know the diagnosis, they need to know the impact. But it does get difficult when we're making recommendations for extensions and things like that, where the lecturers have no real idea of what's behind, you know, the request and how to judge what a reasonable adjustment is, although it's obviously not their role to do that. So yeah, it is a bit of a minefield. I can see the advantages of maybe disclosing the broad category and the disadvantages too. So yeah, it's a bit like Deakin. What we do is a bit like Deakin.
My guess is that many of our audience would have similar experiences and similar considerations around the pros and cons. Would anyone like to make a quick comment on that? Okay, we'll move on. The next question was question 8, can students receive adjustments without a learning access plan? Again, a fraught area for some of us. 58% said yes, students can receive adjustments without a learning access plan. 42% noted no. Again, legal responsibilities come in here, Darlene, and at a couple of our previous presentations of this, we've had some discussion around the legal responsibilities and some feeling that it really isn't meeting our legal obligations to insist that there be a learning access plan. However, that was the response at that time, and remembering that that was a couple of years ago. So plans, for those who receive adjustments without a learning access plan, the plan's not required if the adjustment is one-off or temporary, if they only require exam arrangements, so it may be that a plan isn't needed to go to other areas of the university, if they're registered with the service but no reasonable adjustments are recommended. In more complex situations, a meeting with academic staff may be better than a plan, and students are able to choose to negotiate directly with academics. And certainly in our case at Deakin, if someone chooses not to have a learning access plan, we continue to do a sort of individualised approach from the DLO when an issue arrives. It causes issues for us because we have, you know, so many plans out there now. I think there's around 700 learning access plans circulating at Deakin, that many staff have had students who have learning access plans now and have an expectation of them. And so we find ourselves quite often needing to remind people that these are optional and that adjustments can be made without a learning access plan in place. Jackie, have you had a similar experience at Curtin?
Yeah, we sometimes don't do learning access plans if they're not required, but we've almost made a rod for our own backs because we have a lot of people referring students to us for learning access plans because they want that
Yes.
in the record at the school level, when sometimes it may not be needed, but overall I think it's a positive thing because people recognise our plan and that it's a legitimate kind of document and they prefer that students have them. So yeah, the word is getting out there. We've done probably about over 1,300 of them in the 3.5 years we've been using the system. So there are a lot of them out there. Yeah. But I take your point, you know, I don't know about the legal requirements. I know when they were redrafting someone will probably know more about this than me, but proposing changes to the DDA, there was a mention of having a plan in place, but those changes haven't really gone through. So I think, remember when
that
they
was
reviewed
the
DDA
education
a few years
standards.
ago? Oh, the standards, that's right, the standards, yeah. So there was recognition, you know, there was a requirement for people to have a plan in place, which I guess would be like an access plan, one of the recommendations, but I don't think that's formally been adopted. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that area.
No, thank you. Thank you for that too, because we've been following up with the Department of Education, this is Darlene here, the federal government, in regards to the next year. There's a sunset clause in regards to the disability standards in education, and so you know the review, the outcomes of the review and stuff still haven't been finalised. But you've reminded me because we haven't actually raised that issue with the Department of Education around the fact that that was one of the key recommendations. So I will take it on notice to actually write to them and actually ask, you know, is this a proposal? Because I think the impact for disability practitioners could be quite, you know, for those that are already doing it, it's fine, but for other universities and TAFEs around Australia, the impact will be quite dramatic. So we need to be starting to getting some sense of what it will mean in the review and the new standards.
And the other aspect to that is, you know, our findings here, and I know there's been some more recent work looking at what people are using with plans, but our findings here, while we started thinking, you know, perhaps we'll come up with a best practice plan, what we find is it's very hard to have one practice will suit all institutions, and the concerns about bringing it in will be to what extent there might be some standardised approaches which may or may not work for some people. So yeah, interesting. The next question, and again another area where there are very different approaches to it, do teaching or faculty staff approve the plan? 47% yes. This ensures that teaching staff know that they are required to implement the plan as it's signed off by their Associate Dean Teaching and Learning, and 53% no. The DLU has the authority to make the recommendations. So we have very, you know, different approaches, about a 50-50 split, and different processes at work at different institutions. So it's really quite interesting. And here for us, Jackie and I have quite a different approach. You know, at Deakin we are approving, plans are being approved by faculty, teaching staff. And for you, Jackie, it's still the case that that they're not?
Yeah, they're not. Students distribute them to the relevant academic staff, the unit coordinator and any other tutors each semester for their units. And with such a large organisation, I just cannot imagine an approval system working. I think that would just completely hold up everything, and no one's actually suggested it to us. So I think, you know, again, there's pros and cons, but at the moment we have the authority to make the recommendations. But, you know, often we have to negotiate with academics on some of the specifics of that.
Yeah. And we'll have a look here now on question 11 of what are the pros and cons of faculty and teaching staff approval. The advantage is that staff virtually always accept our recommendation. If we're asked for quite complicated adjustments, we would discuss that in detail with the lecturer before writing the access plan. Deans say that they don't know enough about disability to really make a judgment. I like it anyway in case an academic is resistant to the recommendations in the access plan. And another person said it's time-consuming, difficult to contact and receive teacher input, and delay in confirming adjustments for the students. So yes, there are, as you say, lots of pros and cons. We now call, instead of calling it approval, we call it faculty endorsement. We like that term better than approval, as it infers support of our recommendations. There were some dilemmas that we had around faculties coming back to us and saying, well, how are you recommending this? So I prefer that term of endorsement. I am swayed by the arguments that that unis have about not seeking approval, because there's it gives that control back to students. But the dilemma, of course, is also that the line management endorsement with unit chairs is a very useful useful thing from time to time.
Yeah. One thing we find too, just as Jackie here at Curtin, we sometimes make recommendations, for example, for field work that might need to be part-time or between the hours of 10 and 3 if possible. And academics get quite upset that we've written that in the plan, even though we've just made a recommendation, because it may not be possible. But students hold on to it maybe more than they should, even though we do have a statement about inherent requirements and reasonable adjustments, and that seems to be the most common area where we have disputes with areas, you know, where they say, oh, could you please rewrite it so you're being a bit more broad about the recommendations. So that can be a bit tricky. Yeah, that's all I have to say there.
How do we distribute the plan? And this links, I think, with the approval process, but you'll see on this diagram that the orange section, the student is provided with the document or file to distribute as needed. The blue area, the DLO, distributes on behalf of the student. The purple area, the faculty or teaching school distributes to relevant staff. The small ready area, the learning access plans are recorded on a central database and distributed automatically, and a bunch of other. It's interesting that over half are distributed in ways other than just by the student. Most of the other are both students and faculty, so when we looked into those, that's what they were. So we've recently and continue to have robust discussions about the pros and cons of this distribution, and Jackie, we've started talking about this already over the last couple of slides, but there certainly are pros and cons, I think, about whether the student who's initiating the distribution of the plan. Had some concerns that the faculty distribution is limiting student independence and sometimes puts more pressure on staff, as the adjustment may not be needed in all units, and so people will get learning access plans and feel like there's a number of things that they need to do, but in fact there may not be anything that they need to do. Their teaching, their unit or their teaching approach might be inclusive already. If students distribute, they can have the choice. In the end, we've decided at Deakin to stick with both student distribution and distribution through faculty, and we emphasise the need for students to make contact with the teaching staff to trigger the adjustments. We're considering phasing out distribution as students progress or in response to particular individuals. So if we had a way of either automating or a student choosing to do it themselves in response to where they're at, and in a very individualized approach. I think that would be the perfect approach, but we just haven't got the automation there. Jackie, did you want to add anything around the distribution?
No, we have a completely student-driven distribution model, and it's certainly got its pros and cons, and I know with a lot of students they just don't do it, or they might don't do it after that, or they forget about it, or whatever. But we don't have a system in place that, I don't think us actually distributing it to faculties would work any better, because I think that system would fall down too. And also that would be a much higher workload for us to do that for every student. So again, I think we really need systems to assist us with this.
Yeah.
We're limited by the lack of system support.
Over to you, Jackie.
Okay, do your plans have a review date? 77% said yes and 23% said no. And some of the comments were it was depending on the disability, but all are reviewed at the beginning of the academic year. Depending on the nature of the disability, and never reviewed for permanent conditions, including learning disability. And certainly at Curtin, when we first started off, we kind of put review dates on every plan, even if it was a permanent disability, because I guess we wanted to keep tabs on them all and make sure that it was all working, and building a system where the student had to come back to us to review it. But we recently changed that to make people with ongoing disabilities that aren't going to change, we've changed their plans to be valid for the duration of their course, just because we want to link that also to the exam system, so that their arrangements are in place for the duration of their course. There are again a couple of concerns that people might turn up in 10 years' time saying, my plan's still valid because I'm still in the same course, and things might have changed a lot since then. But I guess in the interest of the student who just needs the extra 10 minutes an hour for every set of exams, it doesn't seem fair to make them come back and review their plan for no good reason, so that's what we've done recently. What about you, Maren? What are you doing at the moment?
Yes, we're similar. We have a 1 trimester, 1 year, and 3-year and ongoing options. We do send annually an automated email out to all students, just asking them to check their learning access plans and to get in touch with us if they are in need of review. And we're also really clear to say that they can be reviewed by request at any time by the DLO, by a faculty, or by the student. I've got to say that I don't think I can recall. Oh, look, I guess when things arise, it is often that a plan is reviewed, and it could be any of those 3 areas that bring them up. So, yeah, that's how we are managing it.
That seems like a good idea, adding that statement. They can be reviewed on request, because that covers you for major changes, maybe in the format of the plan or the system or whatever, or concerns about the adjustments that have been recommended. Okay, so moving on, what do students say about learning access plans? We've got a lot of comments in this area, positives and negatives, but they don't have to repeat their story to everybody, that it makes it easier to approach academic staff, that it's positive and empowering. And I do find students seem quite happy when they walk away with their plan. And unfortunately, when they start using it, that level of confidence might become a little eroded by the response they might get from some people. Other positive, it's a simpler process than repeatedly applying for special consideration. Helps them to see where they're going. So I think there are certainly a lot of benefits, which is why most of us are using them now. Some of the negatives: many are nervous about approaching lecturers. especially with mental health conditions. They have difficulty making sure their arrangements are made for in-class tests, and this is something that we have a problem with. Academics just don't remember. They, mess up on it. Students have to prompt them all the time. And legally, I think that really puts an organisation at risk, especially if the student has advised the lecturer of their requirements at the start of the semester. So other negatives are academics don't always receive, understand or implement the plan, dispute about what's reasonable, particularly length of extensions. That's a really common one for us. And academics wanting to know more than is disclosed on the plan. We find sometimes in our health sciences, academics kind of get into more of a therapeutic role and want to make their own judgments on what's going to work for people. But in general, the health staff are we've got more, sorry. Students sometimes don't understand they should still follow faculty processes, like applying for extensions. And certainly some students think because they've handed in their plan at the beginning of the semester, they are just automatically entitled to extensions. Anyway, you can see the others, and some disturbing occasions where students are identified in front of the class, or we've had a situation where a hard copy was left floating around in the lecture theatre, so all those things are quite concerning.
And I think there were a pile of students at Deakin when we did a survey who said not much about their learning access plans, which left us a little uninformed.
Yeah, okay. So what do teaching staff tell us? Positives were that the messy negotiations were taken out of their hands. It helped with negotiations. It helps set out the responsibilities of academics, and they appreciate the information, and they have a way of knowing who's in their class and what adjustments they might need. And Maren, did you just refer to that survey you were going to talk about?
Oh yes, that we did. We try to do an annual survey of students who are registered with the DRC, and a couple of years ago we did one that also surveyed staff. It was after, I think, our first full 12 months of learning access plans that we sent to staff as well, to just ask people their experience of learning access plans. So we plan to do it again probably next year and have another look at learning access plans, because while so many of us are using them, there are so many pros and cons on it. So I think we've got a way to go to learn how we can improve what we're doing here.
Okay, so some of the negatives, well, just going back, Maren, that sounds like a good topic for another presentation at a future conference. Okay, so what some of the negative feedback from teaching staff, we commonly hear this: they don't have the resources and staffing to, accommodate students with disabilities. But that's not specifically about the plan; it's just more general, because they're allowed an hour a semester at Curtin to spend with individual students. So when you're in their workflow model, so when you're putting additional expectations on them, and I can understand their concerns. Staff wanting to be more involved in developing the plan and making sure that our recommendations are reasonable or doable. Issues arising when students don't provide them early enough. And this is an issue we face because, the legislation says that the plan has to be provided in a reasonable time frame for the adjustment to be made. But I often find academics see the student to be playing the disability card if they produce the plan, close to just when they need an extension or just when they need a test arrangement. And I don't think that's entirely fair. Do you have that issue, Merrin, or anyone else?
Probably not, because we are distributing through the faculties, and so theoretically, the staff will have had access to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is, I guess, one of the cons of the student-centred model, which is much more ad hoc student-centred distribution model. They misunderstand the wording, and I think that concept of our recommendations versus inherent requirements and what's reasonable, it does get quite confusing for all parties. And students sort of say, well, it's on the plan, so it has to happen, and the academics sometimes think, well, they think because it's on the plan it has to happen, and we're trying to say, look, there is room for negotiation if this isn't appropriate for your area. And staff needing more details, wanting more details about the disability, and we often get that issue where people want to know more to help them to make a judgment on a request. Are there any comments on that from you, Merrin? Or
got a whole other page of negatives.
Okay.
There's another.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so more negatives. It can be overwhelming when they have a lot of students with a plan. There's lack of information within schools on the process. Now, this is an issue we have in that, there's a lack of, like, if a student provides it to a particular person, there's a lack of clarity as to who that can be shared with, where it can be stored. What we really need is a system that's linked to the student system, where at least there's a flag or something where, this information can be kept centrally. And we do state on our plans that it can be distributed for the purpose of providing a reasonable adjustment. So that's to the relevant staff, but again, people interpret this differently. So I think process is something we certainly have an issue with, which you might find a little bit clearer at Deakin, Merrin, with your more streamlined process, perhaps. But then the next point is deans don't like the students distributing the plan. They feel the disability service should be doing this. I've already touched on the staff taking the plan too literally, and more complex issues generally require a phone call or a meeting, and I certainly would endorse that. You can't rely on the plan to do everything, and sometimes it just raises more issues than it solves if you just send it out with a lot of controversial recommendations on it. Now, is there anything more from you, Merrin, on that?
No, I will just make the comment, though, that it is interesting that we had 2 pages of negatives and 1 of positive for both students and staff.
Yeah, that is interesting. Okay,
we asked people what was, what was working well. And again, some quotes and just general comments from the respondents. The plans work well generally as a communication tool and a means of staff being prepared to make adjustments. They're also positive evidence that we're meeting our legislative responsibilities. It develops stronger working relationships with academics. An information sheet for students helps them to use and distribute the plan in a timely fashion. A student-centred method of distribution bypasses confidentiality issues, and huge increases in student numbers can be handled more efficiently. So that's what people told us was working well, and here's what they felt could be improved. An automated process from our database sending out the plan would be wonderful. Formalising procedures around the circulation of statements to teaching staff may be helpful, but I'd be cautious about any automatic process for circulation that would take away students' autonomy around disclosure. Include more information on legal obligations of staff and inherent requirements. possibly to include ideas on how a student will best learn, that is, what teaching approaches would assist the student. And after we've added all those wonderful ideas, shorter plans would be better. So you can see that there are such a diverse range of ideas on learning access plans, from automated to not automated, from more to less.
Longer to shorter.
I suspect that everyone, though, would like the idea of a workflow approach, Jackie, and this is the sort of model that you and others I know have been developing.
Well, I wouldn't say we've got anywhere with developing it, but we did discuss a model like this with the Student Services Manager. But University of Western Sydney, and there are some other organisations that seem to have got something like this off the ground. I know UWS has been a customised system that they built from scratch. But basically, what would really work well is that somehow, the information's recorded and the student can access the system and then choose who to send the plan to. So it's automated, their units and unit coordinators come up. The academic coordinators receive notification and then have to acknowledge it. And if it's not acknowledged, then there could be some alert system, so the disability advisor is advised or something. And also the system could communicate with other areas of the university apart from the academic areas as needed. And I just think it would be so, I guess legally too, having that cover and having evidence that, the plan's been distributed, it's being acknowledged, it's available to the people it's been released to, would just cover us so much more clearly than a lot of the current systems that are in place. And I can comment that being on the Pathways 12 conference organising committee, we've actually had a good handful of abstracts about systems for distributing learning access plans, and that's fantastic. And I think probably in the 2 years between the Pathways, this is an area that has developed over this time, because there clearly is a need for streamlining the distribution. And I'm just interested, is there anyone listening who's got something like this working at their organisation? Any hands up? No, I'll take that as a no then. Okay, so just to conclude, so we've come, as Merryn said, to lots of diverse conclusions, but we do know that most of us are using them. We do know they work and they don't, and we love them and we hate them. And we're still learning, and I guess, the first bright idea was to introduce these plans, but now the next stage is actually trying to work out exactly how best to use them and, how to make sure we're fulfilling all our obligations and supporting our students in a streamlined way. Is there any Merryn at this point, or Darlene?
Merryn, did you have something to say?
Not really. Jackie, thank you, and thank you for starting without me. And I guess if we've got a little bit of time, we're very happy to take some questions on how the format has worked for people.
So, Merryn, it's Kylie here. Natalie had her hand up earlier. She had a question for you.
Excellent. So, Natalie, do you want to speak or type? Has the typing stopped or started? I just wanted to add that we have had discussions this week about workflow, but concerns about disclosure. Fantastic. Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah, I think it's a good comment, and there are lots of those struggles in every step of learning access plans, I think, and it's so hard to decide the best way to go, and my view still is that something that has a deal of flexibility around individuals, around different faculties and isn't entirely set in process is the way to go, but I also understand how difficult that can be in terms of time. Sometimes something that is, you know, standard for everyone seems to be take less time.
Can I add one thing we did discuss, I'm not sure if I made this clear, was that even though the plan would go into a central system, that doesn't mean that everybody can see it. There's another level where the student goes in and releases it to particular staff. So that might provide a bit more protection for the student, so it's not just out there for the world to see. But yeah. Is that
okay? Well, any final comments from Merryn and Jackie?
No, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
I did enjoy the conclusion slide. I think that's a great slide. So thank you for that humour. It's been a fantastic opportunity to hear about the topic and also to hear from both of you, because the fact that you both were presented in New Zealand during this year, and so it's fantastic to have been able to capture that for us in the sector here in Australia. I think it's a topic that yes, will continue to be discussed, and especially if the government do decide to put it as a part of, take up the recommendations that learning access plans are more formalised in the further education sector into the future.